The morning of October 10th, 2018, began like any other for 74-year-old John Arthur Getreu. He stepped outside his Hayward, California home, greeted by the presence of a stranger in his driveway. The man appeared flustered, apologetic, explaining he had accidentally struck a parked car while attempting to turn around. John, a husband and father living a quiet, retired life, had no reason to question the story. He offered to take a look, perhaps expecting a minor exchange of insurance information. He walked toward the street, but within seconds, the atmosphere shifted entirely. The stranger's polite demeanor evaporated. Commands were issued sharply. John found himself face down on his own pavement, hands secured behind his back. He remained calm, almost eerily so, even complimenting the officers on their method as they led him to a waiting vehicle. He complied with every order. He appeared to believe this was all a misunderstanding, perhaps a case of mistaken identity or an old warrant surfacing. He had no way of knowing that this carefully staged encounter was the culmination of a months-long investigation. The accident was fiction. The apology was performance. The only reality was that John Getreu was now in custody, and the secrets he had carried for nearly 5 decades were about to be dragged into the light. To understand how investigators found themselves in that Hayward driveway, we must rewind to 1973. That November, the body of 21-year-old Leslie Perlov was discovered in the Stanford Dish hiking area above the Stanford University campus. She had been strangled, a floral scarf knotted tightly around her neck. The following year, another young woman, 21-year-old Janet Taylor, was found in the exact same location, killed in the identical manner. Both cases went cold. Decades passed. Witnesses aged. Memories faded. But the evidence remained. Beneath Leslie Perlov's fingernails, investigators had preserved a DNA sample belonging to her killer. For years it sat in databases, yielding no matches. Then, in 2018, cold case detectives employed a revolutionary technique called genetic genealogy. Instead of searching for the killer directly, they uploaded his DNA profile to public genealogy websites, the kind people use to trace their family trees. The goal was not to find John Getreu himself, but to find his relatives. Investigators built an extensive family tree, connecting distant cousins, tracing lineages across generations. It was painstaking work, eliminating branch after branch. But eventually the tree led to a single name, John Arthur Getreu, a 74-year-old man with a quiet life and a hidden past. The science had done what traditional detective work could not. It had reached across 45 years and pulled a suspect from the shadows. John Getreu sat across from Sergeant Cortez in a small interrogation room. He was cooperative, answered questions directly, and still appeared to believe this was all a misunderstanding. He provided personal details easily. He was born in Newark, Ohio. His father's military career meant the family moved frequently, spending several years on a United States military base in West Germany during his teenage years. He confirmed he had never been arrested in the United States. The sergeant listened, took notes, and then changed direction. He mentioned discovering an incident from Germany. John acknowledged it immediately. He had been arrested there. The sergeant pressed for details. John's response landed like a stone in still water. He had been accused of murder. The young victim was 15 years old, the daughter of a military chaplain. Her name was Margaret Williams. She had attended a dance at an American youth club in 1963, and her body was discovered the next morning on a nearby baseball diamond. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. John was 18 at the time. He claimed he did not know her. He claimed his arrest resulted only from someone seeing him walk in that direction. But the record showed he was convicted at trial and sentenced to 10 years in a German juvenile prison. He served approximately 6 years before being released and returned to the United States. He said he never heard another word about it. For him, it was a closed chapter. For the investigators, it was the first thread in a pattern they were only beginning to see. The sergeant continued his questioning, moving from Germany to California. He asked about another accusation, this one from the Palo Alto Police Department involving a sexual assault. John had been a Boy Scout leader at the time, leading an explorer post for young people. The allegation came from a teenage girl. John was asked directly whether the assault occurred. He denied it completely, stating that nothing happened, that he was accused and interviewed, and that was the end of it. He claimed he served no time, that the matter simply went away. But the official records available through news sources paint a different picture. The teenager who came forward described a terrifying encounter. She alleged that John Getreu had not only assaulted her, but had strangled her during the attack, threatening to kill her if she did not comply. The case resulted in a conviction. He received a 6-month sentence, though he served only 30 days on weekends after 5 months were suspended. This information added a critical layer to the investigators' understanding of the man in the room. The Germany case involved a teenage victim who was strangled. The Palo Alto case involved a teenage victim who was strangled but survived. And now they were questioning him about Leslie Perlov, a young woman who was strangled and did not survive. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. John Getreu had a history, and that history fit the crime they were investigating with uncomfortable precision. Sergeant Cortez shifted the conversation toward the geography of the case. He asked John about the Palo Alto area, specifically the hills around Stanford University. John responded openly at first. He had been a scout leader for years. He had traveled those hills extensively, hiking with the boys, exploring the terrain. It was a natural part of his volunteer work. But then the sergeant narrowed the focus. He mentioned a specific road, Page Mill Road, located just west of the Stanford campus. Had John ever been in that particular area? John's demeanor shifted almost imperceptibly. No, he said. He had never gone to that area. He had never been there at all. The response was definitive, almost too definitive. The sergeant then produced a photograph. It was an image of Leslie Perlov, the young woman whose body had been found in those very hills 45 years earlier. Did John recognize her? He studied the photograph carefully. No, he said. He did not know her. He had never seen her before. The sergeant asked about a vehicle, an orange Chevrolet Nova that had belonged to Leslie and was found parked near the crime scene. John denied any knowledge of it. He denied knowing her name. He appeared composed, untroubled by the questions, but then he made an observation. He commented that she was attractive. He estimated her age at around 18. He added that she was a Stanford graduate. The sergeant noted the detail. He had not told John that Leslie was a graduate. He had only described her as a college student. The discrepancy was small, but it registered. The sergeant did not immediately confront John about the Stanford comment. Instead, he continued building the framework of the investigation. He explained the nature of Leslie's death. She had been strangled. He asked whether John had ever thought about committing such an act. John said no. He asked about fantasies involving sexual assault or violence toward young women. John denied them. The conversation then turned to DNA, how it could be transferred, how it could link a person to a crime. John acknowledged that technology had advanced, that investigators were solving old cases every day. The sergeant posed a hypothetical question. If John's DNA was found on Leslie Perlov, how would he explain it? John said he would have no idea. The sergeant pressed further, asking directly whether John was involved in her murder. John said he was not. He seemed resolute, confident in his denials. But then the sergeant made a statement that changed everything. He mentioned DNA being found on a person, or on 2 persons. John latched onto the phrase immediately. What 2 persons? The sergeant clarified that he was referring to the young woman in the photograph. But John had heard something else. He began asking questions about 2 different places, 2 different victims. He referenced a girl up on the hill. He asked about the location of the second girl. The sergeant had only mentioned one victim by name, but John was already talking about two. He knew about Janet Taylor. A second investigator entered the room, adding weight to the confrontation. He spoke directly, telling John that his DNA was on Leslie Perlov and that there was no other explanation for it. John had committed the crime, and they knew it. What they wanted now was an explanation. They wanted to understand why. John repeated that he was not guilty. The second investigator was unmoved. He stated plainly that John was guilty. John's response was resigned. "Fine," he said, and then he added something unexpected. He acknowledged that he had known this day would come. He had been waiting for it. His only question was why it had taken so long. The investigators pressed him on the details of the crime. Why Leslie? John said he did not know who she was, but then he referred to her as the first girl, or the one girl up on the hill. The investigators seized on the phrasing. What did he mean by the first girl? John explained that the other investigator had mentioned two people, two girls. He asked whether they were killed close together, hours apart, a day apart. He seemed to be searching for information, trying to align his knowledge with what the police knew. The investigator asked whether he remembered reading newspaper articles about the cases. John said no. But when he looked at Leslie's photograph again, he made another observation. He said she was not the other one. He doubted they were the same person. The investigator asked whether that was because Leslie was not the girl he killed. John continued to deny everything, but his denials were becoming tangled. He insisted he did not recognize Leslie, that he had never seen her before. The investigator pressed harder. Did John think it was a different girl that he killed, and that Leslie was simply not the one they were showing him? John's response was defensive. He said he had not killed any girl, but then he added a strange qualification. He referenced the Germany case, saying that was different, that he was 18 years old then, as if that situation was somehow separate from the current accusation. The investigators laid out the pattern clearly. A girl ended up dead in Germany, and John was there. A girl ended up dead in California, and John's DNA was on her. They asked him what he would think if he were in their position. What would the evidence look like to him? John was silent for a moment. Then he said there was a brick wall. The investigator asked what he meant. John corrected himself, saying they had found out what they needed to find out. He was tripping over his own words, contradicting himself. The investigator told him it must be quite a burden, carrying this for so many years. John agreed. He had carried it for a long time. The weight of the moment was visible on his face. Finally, he asked for a lawyer. The questioning stopped. The interrogation was over. But the damage to his case was already done. After requesting an attorney, John Getreu was formally booked into the Santa Clara County main jail. His bond was set at $10 million, reflecting the severity of the charges against him. The quiet life he had constructed in Hayward was gone. In January 2019, forensic analysts delivered another critical finding. DNA recovered from the torn crotch of Janet Taylor's underwear was also a match to John, confirming his involvement in her murder as well. The evidence was overwhelming. In September 2021, a jury found him guilty of first-degree murder in the killing of Janet Taylor. He was sentenced to 7 years to life in prison. For the family of Janet Taylor, the verdict brought a measure of closure after nearly 50 years of waiting. In January 2023, John pleaded guilty to the murder of Leslie Perlov. He received a second life sentence to be served consecutively with the first. The courtroom was filled with the weight of decades. Family members of both victims spoke about the pain of the long wait, the years of not knowing, the frustration of watching a killer grow old while their loved ones remain frozen in time. John Getreu listened to their statements without visible emotion. He offered no explanation, no confession, no apology. He simply accepted the sentence and was led away. The man who had evaded justice for so long was finally held accountable. John Arthur Getreu did not spend many years in prison. On September 22, 2023, at the age of 79, he died of natural causes while in custody. He never provided a full accounting of his crimes. He never explained why he targeted those young women. The full truth of what happened in the hills above Stanford, and perhaps elsewhere, died with him. His death closed the chapter on his prosecution, but left lingering questions. Investigators continue to compare his DNA profile against evidence from unsolved murders across the country. There is no certainty that Leslie Perlov and Janet Taylor were his only victims. The Germany case from 1963 involved a teenage girl. The Palo Alto case from the 1970s involved a teenage girl who survived. The pattern suggests a predator who operated across decades and across continents. For the families of Leslie and Janet, the resolution is bittersweet. They have a conviction. They have a name. They have the knowledge that the man who stole their loved ones from them spent his final days in a cell. But they do not have answers. They do not know why. And with John Getreu's death, they may never know. His DNA remains in the system, a silent witness still speaking for the victims, still capable of linking him to other crimes. The investigation continues. The file remains open.